I feel like this video might be an hour long. Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are doing well. For today's video, I am going to be filming an updated Colourpop palette guide video. I did a video like this in 2018 and also 2019, and you guys seem to really love it, that you have been requesting for me to do an updated one for 2020. And because Colourpop's fulfillment center is currently closed, I thought I would take this opportunity to film an updated Colourpop palette guide because I feel like they're not going to be releasing any new palettes. I do want to say that this video idea is not my idea. I first saw Andrea Matilano. She filmed this back in 2018. I saw her video. I've given her credit for the past two videos, and she's actually seen my last year one, I think, which is so cool. I'll also leave all of her palette guide videos down below as well, so you can get her opinion. She does a lot of Colourpop videos as well. I'm sure you guys already know who she is, but I'll leave all of her info down below. I also want to note that me doing this video is not me trying to show off or brag about my collection. This video is really just for you guys as a guide because there's 56 palettes, you guys. If you are a first-time buyer to Colourpop, seeing all of these palettes is very overwhelming, and I get a lot of DMs from you guys asking me, do you like this palette over this palette? Which palette would you buy? I think just doing a video like this is very helpful to just set the record straight which palettes are my favorite. I just hope you guys know that it's just a guide for you. It's not me trying to show off. That's never my intention, and I hope if you guys have been watching me for a while, you know that's never my intention. I know this is like the longest intro ever. I will leave timestamps down below. First, I do have a video on every single palette. I've done a review and I've done 3 looks with every single palette that I'm going to mention in today's video. So if my description allows it, I will link any related video that I have done to each palette. I'll also leave timestamps, so if you want to skip this intro, you can skip it. If you are curious about a specific palette, you can skip to that part. I'm gonna leave everything you need to know down below. But the last thing that I want to say is that I own probably like 95% of Colourpop palettes. I don't have every single one off the top of my head. I don't have Making Mauves, which is probably one of their latest palettes. I did place an order, but their fulfillment center is closed down and it wasn't able to ship out before that closed. So I will get it eventually once they reopen, but I don't have Making Mauves. I don't have a lot of their Ulta exclusive palettes because we don't have Ulta in New Zealand and Ulta doesn't ship to New Zealand either. There's no way of me getting the Ulta exclusive palettes unless they bring it to the actual Colourpop website, which I do have a couple, but I don't have like X's and O's. I think that was one of them. There's a couple of Ulta exclusives that I don't have, so you won't see that in today's video. And also the Becky G palette, I think it's called Holla Cholla. I did purchase it and I was gonna review it, but then you guys told me what happened and I decided not to review it. So I did decide to just put that palette on the side and add it into a future giveaway. But I feel like 56 palettes, I have the majority, the important ones. So yeah, I just want to say that because I know in my last year video I got a couple comments saying like, oh, you don't have this palette, you don't have that palette. I'm like, yes, I don't have all of them. I think that's everything for the intro. I know, the longest intro ever. Okay, let's just go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm gonna work in categories of the palette size, and then I'll get through every single palette, all 56 palettes. This video is so long, like I'm already sweating, you guys. Once I talk about all the palettes, towards the end, I will give you my favorite palettes, the palettes that I use the most and which palettes I really enjoy, because that is a question that I get asked a lot. Like, it's a lot. So the first category, we should start with the OG, which is the 12 pan. And let's start with the palette that started it all, which is the Yes Please palette. You can see mine is really dirty. This is literally the only eyeshadow palette that I've hit pan in one of the shadows. So I did hit pan on the shade Big Cocktails. When this first came out, this was like the only palette that I was using, obviously, since I hit pan on one of them. And it blows my mind how much like my makeup style has changed, because this is definitely not an everyday palette for me today, but I think back then I was just rocking some bright oranges on my eyes as an everyday eye look, which is all good, but definitely not my kind of style right now. I think this is a classic palette. It's one of Colourpop's, I think, best-selling palettes as well, and I really do like it, but I just don't get a lot of use out of it because, again, my makeup style has changed, and for an everyday look, I typically don't go for bright oranges anymore. I think it is a good, well-rounded palette if you want some really like warm shadows, like a very summertime look, then I think this palette is really great for that. Also at the time there wasn't a lot of like bright yellows as well, so I think Colourpop really made a statement with this. I don't use it as often anymore, but it was a palette that I really did enjoy, and I mean I pick it up here and there if I need specific colors from this palette, but I feel like if you are a warm tone gal, I think you would really enjoy Yes Please. The next palette is Give It To Me Straight, and this is the shadow palette that I am wearing on my eyes today. If you guys have been watching me for a while, I have raved about Give It To Me Straight. It's such a great palette, and it is one of the palettes that I keep in my top drawer, and it's also a palette that I use very often. The palette is made up of some warm tones and also some berry tones. I do stick to more of the warm tones in here, but I do like the options of the berry tones because I feel like on my skin tone I really love warm tones, and I also love like pink and berries. I think it just really complements my skin tone and my eye color. What I love about this palette the most is definitely the mattes. I think the tones of the mattes are so beautiful. I describe them to be like a very muted warm tone. And when I say muted, it's really hard to describe it, but it's not too bright in your face, but it's not too dull. It's like a very like soft glam kind of vibe. We then have Sweet Talk, and I would describe Sweet Talk to be a very like coral peachy orange palette. It is very spring, it's very like flirty. So this is another palette that I do enjoy and that I do keep in my top drawer. I feel like since I've gotten this, I wouldn't say I've used it as often as like Give It To Me Straight, for example, but it's definitely a palette that I dabble into here and there. I just think this is a little bit more brighter than my typical everyday colors, but definitely still wearable, and I think for springtime it's very fresh, very youthful. I like the range of mattes in here. You get a lot of mattes from transitions, mediums to dark, and then you have the very pretty metallic shades. There's also 2 pressed glitters in here as well. I know pressed glitters has become a thing. That's definitely something new since last year's video. They have included pressed glitters in their palettes, and I know some of you guys hate that and you would not buy the palette if it did have a glitter, but I think 1 glitter I'm okay with. Some palettes have like a lot of glitters that I'm not okay with. This one has 2. I think it's okay, and I think it suits the vibe of the palette. So if you wanted a very bright coral peachy palette, then this is the palette for you. And I feel like peach is definitely a color that everybody's wearing right now. And then we have Dream Street, which is in collaboration with Kathleen Lights. I did watch her recent video, and she said that Dream Street and the ZODAIC palette is no longer on the website. So this palette is discontinued, but it was a really great palette. When I first got it, I was using it a lot. I do like the mattes in here, but what I really love is these 2 metallics in the top left corner. It's just so pretty, and I think the color combination with the bright orange and the teal was a very popular color combination, and I think Kathleen really did that with this palette. Like, she said that. But I do enjoy this palette. I dabble in it in here and there. It's not in my top drawer. It is a very pretty palette, and I think the color combination is really pretty as well. Next up we have Double Entendre. I have learned how to say that correctly. Double Entendre. I think I was saying double entendre before. If I say something wrong, like, just correct me politely in the comments, but don't say it in a mean way. But we have Double Entendre, and when I first got this palette, I adored this palette. Like, I loved it so much. I raved about it. I actually lost this palette for a little bit. Like, I had no idea where it was, but it was like literally shoved at the back of my top drawer. It is a really nice palette. It has those really nice warm tones. I think it's more of like a watered out version of Yes Please. Like, Yes Please is like bright in your face, very warm, very summer. This is more of like a very warm full-time sister palette to Yes Please. I think it has everything that you need. So you have the matte white to set down or to highlight, you have your transition, you have the medium, you have the dark brown, you have a highlighting shade, you have the metallics. It has everything that you need in here. So I feel like if you're just looking for a very like warm tone palette that you can wear for every day, Double Entendre is a really great one. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh damn, I wish I use this on my eyes today. Because for me guys, I typically wear makeup when I film, and when I'm filming like a look for a palette, so I don't really have a lot of options to wear palettes that I want to wear because I'm filming a review. So when there is a chance for me to wear makeup that I'm not filming and I can choose an eyeshadow palette, I do stick to the same kind of palette. So like today I went for Give It To Me Straight. So yeah, I feel like I should have used Double Entendre today, but it is a really nice palette. I think a lot of you guys will enjoy this palette. It's just like a good go-to basic palette to have in your collection. And now we have I Think I Love You. It is the same packaging as Double Entendre, but I think they have changed that. I obviously have the original packaging when they first released. So I Think I Love You. I feel like a lot of you guys like this palette, but personally this palette is not really up my alley. I just felt like there's just a little bit too many metallics in here. I think it's a good companion palette, but just these tones, it wasn't really my thing. I probably haven't touched this palette since I first got it, which sounds really bad, but I think me owning a lot of these palettes, even if I don't touch them, it's good for comparisons, and you guys love my comparisons. The only time that I touched it was to swatch for comparisons, and I have seen that over time a lot of the comparisons that I have, I do go back to this palette a lot for my comparisons. So you could say there's a lot of crossovers with this palette. Next up we have Good as Gold, and this is following more of their monochromatic theme that they have been releasing more recently. I think there's a lot of pretty gold metallic shades in here, very unique. There's their new foiled formula as well, which I'm kind of like iffy about. I feel like there's three kind of people. I like to go for the rose gold metallics. There are people that like the silver tone metallics. Typically they like more cool tones, and then people that love like really warm tone, they go for like the gold metallic as their shade. I feel like if you're in that category, you love golds, you always wear gold as your metallic shadow, then I think this is a really great palette to have. It does have mattes that really suit the golds as well, so I feel like if you love wearing gold eyeshadow, then this is like the palette for you. Like this would be like your everyday palette. Next up we have California Love. This recently was actually in my top drawer, but I did take it out because I found myself not actually using it. When I look at this palette, it does remind me a lot of Double Entendre, but I would say it's in between Double Entendre and Yes Please. It's like a good mix of them. It's not too bright like Yes Please, but it's not too like fall vibes like Double Entendre. It's like a good in between. This palette also does have one pressed glitter in here, which might be a cause of concern, but just like the Double Entendre palette, it has the transition, it has the medium, and then it has the dark, and it has a wide range of metallics. So all around shade range wise, it's a really great palette. I think it just comes down to what you already own and what kind of colors you like to play around with. And now we have Sweet Nothings, which was one of the Ulta exclusives from 2018 that they brought over to the Colourpop website. From my memory, if my memory's not failing me, I did not like this palette. I think I had issues with patchiness ever since then. Again, honestly, I have not touched it. I know that sounds really bad, but again, it's good for comparisons, and I did see that with a lot of comparisons that I do, Sweet Nothings is also another palette that I go back to, and I remember that because I'm like, should I add it into my comparisons? Because Sweet Nothings is a palette you can no longer get, but I add it in anyway just in case you guys do have this palette, and that's how I remember that I go to this palette a lot for comparisons. But I feel like the mattes are just not really for me. This is not a color theme that I would really go to. There's not enough transition shadows. There's a lot of darker tones in here. But I mean, this palette you can no longer get, but I feel like you're not really missing out on much, to be honest. And a lot of these shades, I believe they are single shadows. Like I can already see Pretty Cruel is a very Pretty Cruel comes up in so many palettes. It is a single shadow. A lot of these shadows I feel like you can get on its own, so you're not really missing out on too much here, but I just wanted to showcase that anyway. We then have My Little Pony, and My Little Pony was the first palette that I did a 3 looks 1 palette. It started that whole series on my channel, which is what you guys love and what I continue to do today. When I saw this palette, there was just so many like color stories, and keep in mind, I feel like 2018 was the year, like 2017, 2018 was the year where I started like buying a lot more makeup. I started getting more creative with my looks and playing with a lot more color. And when I had this palette, I didn't have a palette like this. I didn't have a lot of color in my collection either. And when I got this palette, it was like, wow, I want to do more than 1 look with this palette. Because before this palette, any palette before this palette, I only did 1 look with each palette. But when I got this palette, I was like, you know what, I want to do 3 looks because this palette is so fun. There's so many color stories, and I got creative with it, and ever since then I stuck to it. And you have to thank My Little Pony, because if it wasn't My Little Pony, that would have never started. But again, since then have not touched it. It's a very colorful palette, but I do think the metallics in here are very unique. Anytime that there's some sort of these metallics in different palettes that I need to compare to, nothing comes close to these. Although you can't purchase it anymore, it was a very fun palette to play with, and it was definitely the like colorful palette that pushed me to do more looks. Now we have Flutter by. This is definitely more of a recent palette. This reminds me of Double Entendre, but more of like a mauve tone palette instead. It does have a pressed glitter in here, here as well, so keep that in mind. But I like how there's a good range of the transitions, the mediums, and the mattes. You'll hear me say that a lot. That's what I really look for in a palette. I first look at the mattes. I'm like, is there a transition? Is there a medium tone? Is there a dark tone? I just feel like it needs to cover that range of tones, like from transition all the way to a deep dark matte shadow. And then I'll look into the metallics again, if there's like a light metallic, a medium metallic, and a dark metallic. And this palette, you definitely have all of that. So I think all around it's a really great palette. If you love like more mauvey tones, this definitely does pull a little bit more to the cool tone side. So definitely every single palette I've shown you so far is definitely more to the warm tone. So if you wanted something more cool tone and more mauvey, this palette would be so suitable for you. We then have Bye Bye Birdie. This palette I actually also reviewed quite recently, I would say probably last month. And I remember I really liked how the looks came out overall, but I remember having some troubles with, I think it was Heroin Chic that I had issues with. But this palette definitely has a lot more metallics. There is pressed glitter, there is a super shock. That's something new. They add super shocks into their palette. I wouldn't say this palette covers that base that I was talking about with transitions all the way to like the dark tones. I feel like it's missing a lot of darker tones and more transition shadows. This palette definitely does give me more like fuchsia vibes, but if you wanted like pinks and purples, there are some 9pan palettes that I do enjoy a lot more that I will talk about later. So I would say you definitely could skip on this one. In my personal opinion, I just don't really gravitate toward this palette as much. Now we have Element of Surprise, which is such an OG palette. I think this might have been like their second or third palette they came out with. And I feel like out of all of the Colourpop palettes, this might be one of the palettes that I like don't even think about. Like it's not even in my brain to like even want to play with. I just think it's very scattered and there's only like 5 mattes in here. Something about this palette was just a bit random. I just don't really go to it. There's not really much that I like. I mean, this pink here is really pretty, but I think there's a similar shadow in the Ooh La La palette, which we'll get to in 20 minutes. And I do want to say that like palettes that I don't enjoy, you might enjoy. Palettes that I enjoy, you might not enjoy. I think it's just personal preference. You might really love Element of Surprise, and I hope I'm not offending anyone when I say I don't like a palette. And when I say I don't like a palette, I'm really just talking about the shade range. I'm not really talking about the formulation. I mean, there are some shades in a palette that doesn't really work well, but I think overall, Colourpop's pressed eyeshadow formula is like beautiful. Next up is the She palette, which was part of the Femme Rosa collection with Karuchi. This palette in the beginning I didn't really enjoy, but I think it grew on me a little bit. I think I used it a little bit more since then. I mean, this palette came out a long time ago. I wish there was just a little bit more mattes in here. Like you only get 4 mattes and the range in the mattes is not really wide. But I think the metallics in here are very pretty, very rosy tone, very on theme with this collection. I'm unsure if you can get this palette anymore. Like this released, it was gone, then they brought it back. I don't know if it's still back or if it's gone now. Now we have You Had Me at Hello. This was their first palette that came with a mirror, which for me personally, again, personal preference, I don't have any use for mirrors in palettes. This came out before Give It To Me Straight, I believe, and I feel like this would be a very similar palette to Give It To Me Straight, where it has your warm tones but it also has those berry tones in there, and I just much prefer Give It To Me Straight. If you want a palette that has warm tones and berry tones, I would say go for Give It To Me Straight. Just personally, that's what I would go for. This one is a little bit more on the like cool tone side a little bit. Like they pull a little bit more to the cool tone scale. If you like that, then obviously this would suit you a little bit more, but I think Give It To Me Straight is just a little bit more flattering against my skin tone, and that's why I love it so much. Next we have All That, and this was their 2020 Valentine's Day palette, and since this is more of a recent palette, I definitely haven't picked this up as much, but overall I did enjoy the palette. There were some issues here and there with some shadows, but there is a red palette in their 9pan that I like a little bit more than this one. I think this has a different kind of tone to that. This one's a little bit more muted. It's not as bright as Main Squeeze. So if you're looking for like a very dark, like vampy red palette, then I think you would really enjoy this one. Next up we have the Whatever palette. I really enjoyed this palette. I've had this in my top drawer for a little while now, and this palette has like your red tones, but it also has some warm shades, and I think what what really draws me into this palette is Miss Brightside. This plum reddy purple works so well. Dark plums are really hard to get right. This one's not patchy, it works beautiful. I love Maybe Later. It has the Super Shock Tardy. I love like these like light champagne and the Super Shock formula. They give such a pretty like iridescent to your eyes. I'm wearing one of them on my eyes right now, which is from a different palette, but I really enjoy this palette. Like if you just want a really good fall palette, I would go for this one. This one just gives me super fall vibes. And now we have Good Sport. I clearly remember that I did not enjoy Good Sport. There was a lot of shadows that I just had a lot of trouble with. I think Sister was one of them. Formulation wise, this palette was not working for me. Maybe when I was filming my review, my eyes were just not having it and it was just not working well. I think Andrea actually really likes this palette, so that's what I mean. Like a palette that I don't like, someone else might love, you might love, vice versa. The metallics in here are really pretty, like this green, the yellow, the olives. Like I think it's a very pretty color combination, but I think the formulation for me for some reason just did not work, and for that I was like, I'm just too scared to go back to this palette because in my head this palette is patchy and like I don't want to use a patchy palette. Clearly remember the looks that I did with these, and I liked how they looked overall like at the end, but I think when you're just working with it, it was just very troublesome. Now we have a Rendezvous, which was an Ulta exclusive that came out with Sweet Nothings that moved into their Colourpop website. I liked Rendezvous more than Sweet Nothings. This color story is very fun to me. I love these teals, like these teals just speak to me, and I think the complementary with like the orange and the gold really goes well together. But again, Rendezvous, just like Sweet Nothings, it does contain a lot of their single shadows, and I think a lot of their Ulta palettes are like that. They just take a lot of their single shadows and put it into one palette. So I feel like you're not really missing out too much on this palette just because you can purchase some of these shadows as single shadows, and I feel like individually these shadows you definitely can find sprinkled out into Colourpop palettes. We have another discontinued palette, which is the ZODAIC palette in collaboration with Kathleen Lights. This palette to me is a palette that I really did not pick up a lot. I don't really blame the palette or the shade range at all, just because this palette is the ZODAIC palette. These shades are made for each zodiac, so they're very specific. I feel like they're not really meant to like collide together. You definitely can make cohesive looks with this palette, but there's no strong like color story to it, and I don't know, there's just this monochromatic gene in my body that I lean towards palettes that have like a very strong color story. It's a lot easier to take in, and I just feel like this did not have that, so it's not a palette that I typically go to, but I don't really blame it for that. It's a very themed palette. It's a very like novelty palette. So yeah, that's just my take on the ZODAIC. Okay, you guys, we are finally onto the last 12 pan. We're onto the last 12 pan, and I've been filming for 45 minutes. The last 12 pan palette we have is the SALVAJE palette with Becky G. This was her first collab. I personally did not enjoy this palette because this came out after Dream Street, and this reminded me a lot of Dream Street with like the teal complementing the orangey reds. I just felt like I already had that in my collection with Dream Street, and I prefer these shades in Dream Street a lot more than the SALVAJE, so I don't really lean towards this one because I feel like I can get very similar looks with Dream Street. I mean, obviously there is a difference, but I think for the most part there's a huge comparison between the two, so I didn't really enjoy SALVAJE as much. I much prefer Dream Street. Okay, you guys, so that was all of the 12 pans in that format, but we do have this special format. This is a 12 pan palette, but it's in this long rectangle, which I really don't like, you guys. Like I really don't like this. This is the only palette of this sort from Colourpop, and when you slightly have a bit of OCD, like this just does not fit anywhere. But this is the Brunch Date palette with Zoella. I have not touched this since I've gotten it. I just feel like this palette was a little bit lackluster. There's no shades that really like scream out to me. I really like the concept of her collection, but just this palette was not for me. But it is a 12 pan, and I just wanted to add it into this category. So next category, let's jump into the 9 pans. They have released so many 9 pans, like it's crazy how many 9 pans we have. I think it's almost the same amount as the 12 pans. So let's just dive right into it, okay? We have the Honey palette. This is their yellow palette. A lot of their 9-pan palettes are going for a theme. They're very monochromatic, so this is their yellow monochromatic palette. I personally didn't get a lot of use out of this palette just because yellow, again, is not my like color story that I go for on the everyday, but I just feel like these monochromatic 9-pan palettes just come in so handy because if I need a yellow shade, then I'll definitely go for this. If you wanted something that's wearable, that's similar to this, I would say go for Good as Gold, because Good as Gold has those like warm tone mattes that you can pair with these yellow golds. This one, it's very like bright. I feel like it's a little bit hard to create looks with it just because all of these shades are very light. There's nothing very dark in here. If I need a yellow palette, like I'll go for this. And I hope they come out with like a rainbow palette where it has some of Honey, Orange You Glad, and all of the brighter monochromatic palettes and like just combine them all into like a mega palette. I think that would be really cool of them to do. But like we have here, we have Orange You Glad, and honestly I thought I would get a lot more use out of Orange You Glad just because like orange, yeah, I can go for oranges in my everyday. There's some lighter tones that are a little bit more peachy, but I didn't find myself using this one as much. But there are a lot of like special oranges in here. I love how they touch base on different undertones of orange. So you have like a red orange, then you have like a true orange, you have a terracotta orange. Like I like how they covered that. Honestly, all of these palettes are like what you like, what you prefer. It just really comes down to personal preference. So if you love oranges, I think you get a really good range of oranges in here, but it's not oranges that I would like typically wear, you know? We now have Main Squeeze, and oh, Main Squeeze is such a good palette, okay? This is their red palette, and like I mentioned before when I was talking about the all of that, if you want a red palette, go for Main Squeeze. Main Squeeze is so pretty. Like, although I'm not gonna wear this palette every single day, I'm not gonna wear red on my eyes like going to get groceries, but this palette is so pretty. I think this palette will look good against a lot of skin tones. If you're very fair, my skin tone, if you're deep, like this palette, I feel like red is such a pretty color. You get 6 mattes in here, 3 metallics, perfect shade range. Next up we have Blush Crush. This is a very recent palette. When I saw this palette, honestly I thought I was gonna like it a lot, but surprisingly I did not enjoy it as much. Like when I saw this palette, I'm like, oh, it's gonna give it to me straight vibes, but when I played around with it, I wasn't really like in it, you know? Some palettes you think you're gonna like, but you just don't, and this was one of those palettes. I think I need to give it another chance. I think I said that in my review and I haven't yet, so I'm gonna put this on my top vanity and give it another chance because why don't I like this palette? I feel like this is so me, but okay, I'm gonna try this out again. But that palette did come out with Nude Mood, which Nude Mood is my palette, okay? I am wearing Wink Wink, which is their Super Shock at the inner corners of my eyes, which I love. Wink Wink is so pretty. Like $12 US for Wink Wink alone is worth it. If you just need a true warm toned staple palette, I think go for Nude Mood more than Double Entendre, to be honest. Although it's a lot smaller, I just feel like every single color in here is necessary. There's not one shade in here that I would not use because every shade is just necessary. And I feel like Nude Mood gives me more like cafe vibe. It's very like warm, it's very cozy, and I feel like Double Entendre is a little bit more muted, it's a little bit more grown up. Then we have Going Coconuts, and I mentioned this in my Nude Mood review, but when I saw Going Coconuts, I envisioned Nude Mood. When I saw the shades, I thought they would be more warm, but when you get this palette, it is very cool tone. And for someone like me that doesn't like cool tones against my skin tone, I'm not gonna really lean towards this palette. But for those of you guys that love cool tones, and this palette is going to be like your holy grail. Like this is going to be your Nude Mood, you know? Because it covers everything. It has your transition, it has your medium tones, it has your dark, and the range in here is beautiful. There's 6 mattes, 3 metallics, perfect for a 9-pan in my opinion. So we have these 2 palettes here. We have Nude Mood, Going Coconut. If you need a staple palette and you like warm tones, go for Nude Mood. If you like cool tones and need a stable palette, go for Going Coconut. Both will be great, but it's just personal preference. Now we have Baby Got Peach. For a while, I was wearing this palette a lot. I was doing a lot more natural looks. I probably couldn't achieve an eye look like this if I didn't have another companion palette with it. This left row is so beautiful. Next up we have Strawberry Shake. With some of these palettes I remember clearly the looks that I've done and that time frame, and when I was filming the looks for this palette during that period is when I thought my cat passed away, but he actually just went missing. It's a long story, but that time in my life was probably the saddest time of my life. Like I've never been more sad. I don't want to get too deep here, but you know, it was just a really tough time for me, and this palette, I did not want to touch it, okay? But obviously my cat is okay now. He's back, he's healthy, he's all good, we are all good, but since then I haven't touched his palette. I don't know why, maybe it's just like the memories I have with it, but honestly, like, it is a really good palette. Like, you get these really fun bright pink shadows which are very unique in my opinion. So I think this is another palette that I might put on my top drawer and give it another chance. The next palette I'm going to show you I do like more, which is the Ooh La La palette. It is their pink palette and I go to this palette when I need a pink shadow. This is just the pink palette. I use it so much as I can for a pink eyeshadow palette. If you just need a pink palette, Ooh La La would be the one that I would recommend. I don't necessarily think you need both just because they are actually quite similar. I would say Strawberry Shake definitely has more of that red base, but I would go for Ooh La La in my opinion. Even if I didn't have those memories attached to Strawberry Shake, I definitely would still go for Ooh La La. So I love Ooh La La because it's just amazing. Okay, so the next two palettes I'm going to talk together because they did release together, and this is the Anna and Elsa palette in collaboration with Disney. So obviously Anna's palette is a lot more wearable. You have those warm tones and a hint of purples in there as well. I wouldn't say that there's anything so special about these shades in here. I think you definitely could just use other palettes you have in your collection to create an Anna look. But I would say in the Elsa palette, although these shades are not very wearable, there's a lot more unique shades in here, like very unique shades. If you see this palette and you're like, oh, I don't have that kind of blue, I don't have this like silver metallic or this periwinkle purple. But I think for like these kind of collabs, it's definitely more of like the novelty thing. If you want to cosplay as Anna or Elsa and you're using the Anna palette and the Elsa palette, then it's like, wow, you know? But I don't think it's really necessary to have these palettes to achieve those looks. The next two palettes I do want to talk together as well. So we have the Lilac You a Lot and It's My Pleasure. So let's talk about It's My Pleasure because It's My Pleasure is my girl. I do use It's My Pleasure a lot, but the shade that I use most is Sleeper. And Sleeper, I believe you can purchase as a single shadow, so maybe I should just do that. Sleeper is like a really, really great dark purple plum. Again, it's like Miss Brightside from the Whatever palette. So what I typically do is I'll use the pinks from Ooh La La and I'll use Sleeper from It's My Pleasure. Combine these two, beauty, love it. I do dabble into other shades as well. Kitten Fish is a good one. You got Pretty Cruel. I mentioned Pretty Cruel earlier. Pretty Cruel. The purples in here are beautiful. Like these metallics are stunning. But we do have Lilac You a Lot. I feel like Lilac You a Lot gives you more of the metallics that I think it's a good companion palette for It's My Pleasure. So if you just love purples, like purples is just your color, you know? If you want to create an army look, then these two palettes together will be very, very pretty. But if you just wanted to get one, I would definitely go for It's My Pleasure. Another collab palette we have is with BIRDIE / Pony's Makeup, who I love and adore, but this palette I didn't love and adore so much. I mean, it's really pretty and I like the looks that I created with the palette, but I guess when there's so many like pressed glitters in here, it's really hard to just use this palette alone. I think the mattes are really pretty and you can create very like soft glam looks, but when Pony uses it, I'm just like, damn, maybe I should like this palette because she makes it look so good. But to me, I don't know, it's just not a palette that I would constantly go to. Some more palettes that I want to talk together, the Meant to Be and Just My Luck. Again, it's very similar. Like I like the original like color, but then I like the pastel companion palette that they came out with. So Just My Luck is such a pretty green palette. The pink, the purple, the green and the blue palettes are all beautiful palettes. They are so well done. I think those four are just beautiful. I mean, obviously there are palettes out there that will give you all of these shades in one big palette, but I think it's really cool to just, you know, if you see this in your collection, you know what you're getting inside. So Just My Luck is a really well done palette. You have the 5 mattes, the 4 metallics, and I just love the range in here. I would recommend. And when they came out with Meant to Be, at first, honestly, I wasn't really like on it, but when I did my Hisoka look, which was my previous video, I was like, wow, this palette's actually really beautiful. And I think using these palettes together is so stunning, and I think they're very different actually. Like, I'm not gonna say that you should just get Just My Luck because Just My Luck is very green, but this one, it gives you a completely different vibe. You definitely get mint in here, so I would actually recommend both. I think in my original mint video I was like, I'm unsure, but actually I like both. But like I mentioned earlier, that the blue palette is amazing as well. So this is Blue Moon, which is so cute. Again, it's just really well done. There's just so many different undertones of blue in here. Like you get the true blue, the sky blue, the periwinkle blue, and the metallics are so unique. It's honestly, you can't compare it. Like really, you can't. This was just a really beautiful blue palette. We then have another collab with Karushi. This is Brown Sugar. Brown Sugar is a really great palette as well. A lot of you guys ask me if I like this palette or if I like Nude Mood, but I like both. I would say I do gravitate towards Nude Mood just because I do prefer the shimmers in there as well, and just overall I have a use for every single shade. But for Brown Sugar, it gives me a different kind of vibe. It gives me like a very fall vibe. I don't use it as much as Nude Mood, but it's still a very beautiful palette. It's not in my top drawer, but it's a palette that I do remember of, and if it's a day off and I want to wear makeup, I would consider Brown Sugar, is what I'm trying to say. You know, it's a contender. We then have Smoke Show. Smoke Show is a really cool palette too. So it has a lot of like gunmetal, silver, gray shades. I know I said this in my review. A lot of these things I'm saying in this video I have said in my review, but if you do a lot of like cosplay looks, then this would be a really great palette to have, because you have the matte white and then you have the matte black. It's great for highlighting and shading and for grays. Like, this palette is very special, I think. I don't have a gray like this in my collection. This is like a very glam midnight kind of palette. So definitely one to pick up in my opinion. I personally haven't seen a color palette like this. And then we have Makeup Shayla's collab. This is Proceed with Caution, which is actually her second collab with Colourpop. We'll get to her first one once we hit that category. These shadows are pretty, and it really does fit into the theme of her collection, like the concept of like, you know, a work site. It really ties in with that. But for me, it wasn't just a palette that I would typically go to for an everyday look. And if you're just going to use this palette on its own, you can create a really well-rounded eye look. You will have no issues with that. And to finish off the 9-pan category, let's start off with the OG 9-pan. This is where it all started, with the Soul and Ma palette. Soul is really fun as well. Compared to the orange palette, I would say this one I would do more like vibrant looks, and you can create something a little bit more neutral with this as well, because you do have more of the brown metallics in here compared to the orange palette that you don't have. It is a really great palette. I enjoyed this one, but I think the Ma palette at the time, it was very, very special to me, and I feel like it still is for these two shades here, the blue and the teal. I think the color combination in here is really fun as well. You can create a very subtle neutral look without the blues, but then you can add in the blues for popper colors. If you want to experiment with some blues but you don't want to get like a full-on blue palette, this palette would be a really ideal one for you. Okay, so next category we have the 16-pan palettes, which kind of look like this. This one is in collaboration with I Love ZODAIC. This is Through My Eyes. This palette to me is a palette that is very scattered. There's not like a strong color story, and I know I said that I like palettes that have a strong color story, but this palette is beautiful. Mainly what really sticks to me is the formulation on some of these metallics in here. Mesmerized. I was wearing Mesmerized every day to work last year. Literally all the time. I eventually stopped wearing makeup to work, but when I was wearing Mesmerized so often. It's like a metallic, but it has little specks of glitters in there that shine like a Super Shock shadow. It's so fine and it's so shimmery. It's so pretty. Mesmerized was just a banger. Flicks, I don't use Flicks often, but it's the same kind of formulation. I did keep this in my top drawer just because of the single shadows in here. I typically wouldn't use this palette as a whole, like combined as one. I typically would go on this palette for like a certain shade. Another collab in the 16-pan is with Makeup Shayla. This was her first collaboration that I talked about. If you have tried the Born to Run palette from Urban Decay, this would be like that on a budget, because it's very similar where it has the metallic jewel tones with the matte shadows. This does have a lot of metallics, but I think the jewel tones are very pretty. I feel like there's only one other palette that has this kind of jewel tone concept to it. And the next palettes I want to talk about is Fame and Fortune, and these release together, and when you combine the two they create a little circus tent, which is so cute. I love this packaging. But the Fame palette is for those of you guys that just love cool tones. I mean, I think a lot of the palettes that I have talked about today are very warm, or at least neutral. Nothing really pulls this cool tone. So this is a palette that I think all you cool tone lovers will love. And even if you don't like cool tones, I think the metallics in here are very pretty. I think pairing the metallics with some warm tone shades that you have will look very nice as well. So that's when I go back into this palette, is when I want to use some of these metallics. I don't really use the mattes as much because again, don't really like cool tones. On the other hand, we have Fortune, and Fortune is a really great palette as well. It has your warms and berries in here, but just in a bigger version. Say it's like Give It To Me Straight, but a little bit more vibrant. It does give me similar vibes to the It's All Good palette, which is their mega palette. This is more of like a condensed version of that in a way. And the last 16 pan palette I have is Truly Madly Deeply, which is one of their Ulta exclusive palettes, and I just did my review on this really recently. But pretty much all these shadows, you can purchase them as a single shadow. So a palette like Through My Eyes, where it didn't have a strong color story, I still liked it. This one doesn't have a really strong color story either, but it was confusing to me, and I personally just didn't enjoy this palette as much. There's a lot of pressed glitters, there's a lot of metallics, not many mattes that I could play around with, so I would say you definitely could skip out on this one. And now onto the next category, which is the 15 pans. A lot of these are Disney palettes or holiday palettes. So let's start off with the Disney palettes first. We have the original It's a Princess Thing palette. I have talked so highly about this palette because I love the mattes in here. The mattes in here are my perfect mattes. Like, I was gonna use this palette today, but I'm like, you know what, I've used this palette so many times, let me use a different palette. I really enjoy the mattes. Like, I love Grumpy, Triton, Abu, Beast. I think the last 2 times I've traveled overseas, I brought this palette with me just because typically when I travel, I only wear mattes. I don't really like to wear any metallics or shimmers, and this just has all the perfect mattes for me. I don't even use the shimmers, so I don't know how worth it is for you guys to go and purchase it, but for me, it's so worth it to me because the mattes are just so perfect. They're like just so on point. They have that muted vibe that I want. I love the mattes in here, so this is like definitely like my favorite palette. Probably. We then have the Misunderstood palette, which is for the villains, and this is the palette that I was talking about that has those jewel tones similar to Perception, but these jewel tones are a little bit more like brighter. I feel like the jewel tones in Perception is a little bit more like dull and muted, not in a bad way, but these ones are definitely more vibrant. So if you like that, then it's very pretty, but I think using this palette alone just to create looks, it's going to be very hard because there's only 5 mattes in here, and the mattes are not really like a good range, so it's quite difficult to do that. This would be a good companion palette to have as metallics, like as extra metallics, because they're very pretty, very unique. Then we have the Midnight Masquerade. I think it is a really pretty palette. You can create really pretty looks with this, but I would still go for It's the Princess Thing. And lastly, the most recent collection is the Mulan palette. If you did watch my review, then you already know how I'm feeling about this palette. It is a nice palette. You get the warm tones on this side, the cool tones on this side, but it just wasn't really for me. I think it was just a little bit too neutral. There was nothing that was really standing out to me. By the time when you have so many palettes, like, it's really hard for a palette to really stand out to you. It has to be very special for it to stand out, and this palette just wasn't for me. And the last 2 palettes are from their holiday collection. This one is from 2017. It says on the spine, which I love. This one is All I See Is Magic. I personally don't use this palette a lot. Again, it's a very mumble jumble kind of palette. There's not a strong color story in this. I don't live in a single shadow. Now and Zen is a single shadow. Some of these are single shadows, but I think for some of these shades you could just find in different palettes, and because it's discontinued makes me not want to use it even more. And then we have 2018's holiday collection. This one's definitely a really fun one. I think it's very colorful. I like the color stories. I like how row by row you get a different color theme. So first row you get the warms, second row you get the pinks, and bottom row you get the blues. And this color story is so pretty because you could match the warms with the pinks, and that will give you like a sunset vibe. You can match the browns with the blues. Like, it's just so complementary to each other. All of these shades in here, no matter what color combo you do, it'll be very pretty. Something very different for a holiday palette as well. Okay, you guys, we are slowly getting there. We have 6 more palettes to talk about, 2 categories left, so let's just push through, okay? So the next category I want to talk about are these like little mini palettes. They haven't really released any more of these, but I thought I would mention it anyway. These 2 are an 8 pan, and these are from Bretman's collection. So we have the Wet palette. I don't know if these are still available as well because they did come out a while ago. This palette did remind me a lot of the Mar palette, where it has the neutrals in here but also the blues. I personally would still go for the Mar palette because you do have more neutrals to play with. This one you only have 2 in here. Although you still can use these for a good eye look, I would still go for Mar. But there's a lot of pretty shades in here, like a lot of unique shades. I think Finished is a really nice lilac blue. Then we have the Lip palette. The Lip palette is really pretty as well. I personally didn't get a lot of use out of it. I feel like the reds are very reminiscent of main squeeze, which I love, but I would still go for main squeeze. Then we have like this little 6-pan. This is called Pretty Much. I don't remember if this was for purchase or if this was like a free gift. There was like another mini one that was full of metallics that I put into a giveaway. I didn't even keep it. I have not even used this, but I feel like you can definitely create a really solid eye look. You got the transition, the medium, and the dark tone, and then the metallics to use as well. Okay, you guys, we are on to the final category. We are now moving into the mega palettes. We have 3 here. The first one being is the So Jaded palette by Kathleen Lights. Once again, this is her 3rd palette. It is very heavily themed. She is following the gemstones, and you can see that there's no like specific color story. It does look very scattered out, but if you really break it down, every corner is like a little quarter. So you have the greens, the blues, the pinks, and the neutrals, and I feel like the color combinations you can do are very wide because again it's very sporadic. It's very hard for me to like think of a look to do when I look at this palette. Although it seems like there are a lot of unique shades in here, there are a lot of comparable shades from other palettes that we just have talked about for the past hour. You can create so many different looks with this palette. The choices of looks that you can do with this palette is endless, so for that reason I would say it is worth it. We then have Bare Necessities. I love Bare Necessities. This is like a bigger version of Give It To Me Straight, but it's very different. Like you could have Give It To Me Straight and you could have this palette and it'd be very different. This just covers everything. Like it covers straight down from the lightest matte white to the matte black. Like there's everything in between in there. I like how there's some warms, there's some berries, very similar to Give It To Me Straight once again. You know what I would want? If they added like a super shock shadow in here. If they added Wink Wink in here, oh, this would be perfect. Perfect. The last palette, we made it. It's all good. It's all good. We made it. This is their recent makeup palette, and again it does remind me of Fortune. If I would have to choose Fortune or this palette, I would go for this. This is a very pretty summertime cocktail palette. Very bright, a lot of pinks, and complementary with the yellows and the golds. But you can also create some very natural like soft glam looks like I am wearing today with this palette as well. So that, you guys, was my updated Colourpop palette guide video. It just blows my mind. Like my guide video from 2018 to 2020, there's a huge difference. The length of the video, the thumbnail is like extensive. Like wow, like they really hustled and bustled over these 2 years to release all of these palettes. Oh my gosh, you guys, I've been filming for almost 2 hours. Okay, but now that we have talked about all of the palettes, I want to give you my favorites since this is a very frequently asked question. So I'm gonna break it down into 2 categories. My favorite palettes that I use the most often, like my most used palettes, 2 palettes that I enjoy. Like I enjoy them, but I don't really use them that often. We'll talk about my most used palette. You probably could point out which palettes that I did lean towards more. I think when there was a palette that I didn't really like, I didn't really know what to say, I didn't really say much, and my mood was just like eh. But when I liked the palette, I was like, yes girl, go get it. So I think my most used palette would have to be the Disney It's a Princess Thing palette. Those mattes are my favorite mattes ever, and I love. They're just so perfect. The next palette would have to be Give It To Me Straight. These are probably the next closest thing to my perfect matte. It is what I'm wearing on my eyes today. This is a classic Judy look. My number 3 spot would have to be Nude Mood. I think Nude Mood all around is such a great palette because it has everything you need in a very small, compact 9-pan little palette. I love Wink Wink. I'm never gonna stop talking about Wink Wink because Wink Wink is the most pretty like super shock shadow ever. They had that in a single. I definitely would purchase that. 4th place will probably have to be Bare Necessities. It is a mega palette. It covers everything that you could possibly ever need. So Bare Necessities is a really nice one. So as of recently / over the past couple of years, I think those 4 palettes would have to be my top 4, like my most used, the ones that I always go to. But some honorable mentions that I do use a lot is Sweet Talk, Whatever, Through My Eyes I used a lot, Baby Got Peached I use a lot. And obviously they're like very neutral, very like, you know, basic, you could almost say. So some other palettes that I really enjoyed and would highly recommend that I don't typically use very often, but I use them for a specific look or for a specific time. So palettes like the Ooh La La, Blue Moon, Main Squeeze, It's My Pleasure. I love the mint. Like a lot of the 9-pan, the monochromatic ones, I think you guys can kind of pinpoint which kind of palettes that I did enjoy when I was talking about them. But like, you know, overall those are the ones that I would highly recommend to you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Even though I have been filming for 2 hours, I still need to go and film product shots, swatches, B-roll for all these palettes, which is gonna take me probably even longer than 2 hours. So if you guys could give it a thumbs up, I would seriously appreciate it so much if you did, because this video is just a lot of work. But with that being said, I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Like, what are your favorite palettes from Colourpop? Do we have similar favorites, or do we have the complete opposite favorites? Did some palettes that I personally didn't enjoy is like your favorite palette? I would love to hear your thoughts, so definitely drop them down below. But with that being said, you guys, I'm going to let you go. I've been keeping you for too long. I think this might be the longest video I have ever uploaded. Thank you so much if you did make it to the end, if you didn't skip, like if you made it to the end, like truly, I love you. Thank you so much. I don't know how you did it. Like, I'm already sick of myself, okay? Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I love you guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!